Welcome and thank you everyone for joining us for another Twitter Space. Today is July 14th, 2022, and this is episode 10 of the ledgerscale Internet of Value Open Forum. Now, ledgerscale was founded with two goals in mind. One, we want to provide educational services to scale up the number of brains who understand how distributed ledger technology works. And two, we intend to one day run hardware to provide infrastructural support to the distributed ledger technology networks that we believe are ESG friendly and running a form of decentralized consensus. And we host these spaces Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday starting at 3:30 Eastern Standard Time. And then we host a space on Wednesday that starts at 5 and ends at 6, which this week we went a little bit past. We had a great topic. When we spoke about custody. If you would like to go back to one of our videos and go and check it out, we post all of them on YouTube as well as on the Twitter at ledgerscale. And if you could just give us a follow on that account, make sure you turn notifications on so you know when we go live, and subscribe to our YouTube.
Yeah, so basically we're here to engage the community. So please, if anybody has a question, raise your hand. I think most of the people in here currently kind of know how things work, which we appreciate you coming back. If you're curious about something, I guarantee you somebody else is asking or wondering the same thing. So these are an open forum. Just please be cordial if you do choose to speak up, and welcome to the space.
I'm going to invite everybody up, and if you can't speak right now, it's cool. Just ignore it. I'm here. I'm going to be quiet for a little bit, but I'll be back in like an hour.
Yep, no worries, man. I'll be here. Josh, I've read so much stuff today. I'm trying to think of what. We didn't. Okay, so since yesterday, we didn't talk about the judge basically telling the SEC to hand over the Hinman emails. Because, I mean, that wasn't yesterday's topic. But I think that's probably potentially like a pretty big thing. And I'm kind of curious. I don't know if they'll make them public. I think the SEC already has like asked for redactions and some other something. I think they can appeal it to the Judge Torres, and which I don't know why there's two judges, but apparently that's how it's done. So that'll be interesting. I think that was a pretty big win for Ripple and the crypto community, like in total or in whole.
Yeah, I think it's that the next thing to watch for is the appeal, if they're going to appeal it and what's going to happen, you know. But from the language from the judge, like I don't know why would they appeal it? You know, like even when in the hearing like a month ago, it was obvious that the SEC actually knows that it's a losing battle. You know, so if they appeal it to delay,
time is money, right? Yeah. The longer you can hold down the innovation, the longer the incumbents can continue. Oh, what's that guy's name? I can see his face. I think he's part of the New York Fed or the Boston Fed. I forget which one. He wears a mustache. Which is weird. But he calls them legacy pools of profitability. So like the longer you can delay these technologies and new business models, changing the topology of the banking network, the longer the existing incumbents can just continue profiting from their legacy pools of profitability and everything they've already got going. And it's not like the legacy banks are going to go away. That's not going to happen. But they're going to have to adapt at some point. It's just to push it off, like kick the can down the road. Wait till tomorrow.
Yeah, so the idea is are they gonna appeal? And if they appeal, like how long it would take, that's what we need to look for. And let's say what's her name? Judge Torres, like okay, she she didn't overturn the what Netburn said. Then what is the next step? Because they say the next step is gonna
I think
be
it's like, if I remember right, and I could be wrong, but I think it was like they've got 2 weeks, they being the SEC, to file some, I don't know, appeal or something, and then like basically 30 days, and
yep.
then Judge Torres has to be like, hey, yeah, so like we're a country of laws, or
Because the language, okay, so the language that uh, whatever Netburn used, it's kind of like really, really strong language. It's mean like it's there is no way another judge is gonna overrule her judgment here, because the strength of the language.
so I
And
wrote the whole thing. She built her case. She did it
yeah,
section after section. She
yeah,
came to the conclusion, and
and she called them names. That's kind of unusual. You know what I mean? So it's,
I learned a new word.
yeah,
Oh, what was the word? It started with a T.
I,
Totaler.
I've, yeah, I've seen your tweet about it, and I'm not gonna try to pronounce it anyway. So
I oh, I should look it up. Yeah, it basically it's basically like it's not a word I've ever heard before. Um, it's basically kind of like a little bit of an insult. Like, hey, you just said the same thing twice using different words. Like, what, did you not think you said it right the first time?
yeah, no, yeah, I read your tweet and the definition of it. What I mean is, it's like it seems like she's certain about her judgment. Like there is no way that actually Judge Torres is gonna overrule her judgment. And most likely, like, what are the chances that she actually talked to Judge Torres before she released her judgment? And I don't know, maybe it's illegal for her to do that. I have no clue because I'm not a lawyer, But I'm saying, what are the chances she actually talked to her before she say
I
what
mean,
she?
I would say there's probably a higher than zero probability, but I'm not a lawyer either, so I have no
Yeah,
freaking clue what the
yeah.
protocol is.
So my opinion is, like, I don't think Judge Torres is gonna overrule what she said, but then they can ask to go to a different court to for appeal, but then they have to take the permission from Judge Torres. But most likely she's not gonna agree. That's what I heard, or that's what John Deaton said. Okay, but then they can do something different, where they actually, they can get permission from the Congress or something like that, to get an appeal. But they say, like Deaton say, with the climate right now, with the political climate, it's highly unlikely they would do that, or Gary Gensler would do that. So the idea is, I think, yes, they are going to make it longer, but now they are actually, like, what, they are getting cornered. If there is really something important in this document or emails, there is no way other. There is two things: either they're going to settle or they are going to drop the case. Yeah,
I think drop the case would be the worst possible outcome. Because you achieve zero clarity. You leave all this stuff up in the it just that's the most worst possible outcome, I think. And I'm not a lawyer, obviously, but I mean, the other outcomes are what? Settlement, go to jury, appeal it. Let's take 5 years or whatever, and go to the Supreme Court. And by that point in time, the U.S. has lost our advantage in the financial markets. Super stupid. Just really stupid. But, that's an outcome. And, at least the Supreme Court would ultimately render a decision. I mean, the courts will, as slow as they go, they will ultimately crank out a decision. Like, they don't want this stuff. Trust me, they got other cases going on. I don't know what they are, but I'm sure they got more cases than they can handle. So they want this kind of stuff out, done. And especially with the publicity, I highly doubt that these judges are really excited that,
But even if they drop the case, dropping the case, that's mean actually Ripple won. It's not one like they got clarity. It's one from a point that, okay, if they try to do that to another crypto, they are gonna use the same defense that actually Ripple used, and it's not gonna cost them a lot of money because basically they can. I'm pretty sure they can use the same point that Ripple used in their case. So basically, any lawyer would be in front of the judge and actually can use Ripple case as an evidence.
So my mother had a case, and she had a pretty strong argument, and they actually ran it up to the state DA and ultimately dropped the charges on her client because they didn't want to set precedent, right? Because if they set precedent, exactly what you're saying, then a bunch of other people in the future could use that same argument. So there's a non-zero probability that happens. I think it's not desirable. Yep. I think if we go back to the 2015 FinCEN case, where they just called it a digital currency, I'm really not sure. I wish we had an attorney there.
The question is, when they drop the case, does that mean in the future other lawyer cannot use this case as an example, or as a?
I believe so. I believe that's true. I'm not 100% sure. I'm not.
Hold on, let me answer that so y'all can kind of get some information on that. So the circumstances and the material information in the cases are different, right? So it doesn't necessarily automatically create precedent. And I'll give you an example. Ripple, for as far as we know, is one of the only, if not one of the only kind of like altcoin situation that wasn't born out of this kind of ICO environment that we had at the time, right? So because of those circumstances being so different, a person who established their business model off of an ICO can't turn around and come and say, well, I'm just like Ripple, and so y'all can't sue me and I'm going to use this precedent. Because you actually took people's...
Ethereum had an ICO. Does that mean...
Yeah, I know. 99% of the people had ICOs Egyptian, so that's what I'm trying to explain to you. They can't go and then use the Ripple case definitively as precedence because the material differences, the material circumstances in the case are so different that the prosecutor immediately say, no, you had an ICO, and based on common enterprise, efforts of others, except you're a classic security, right? And they would apply to them. But where a lot of the ICOs are hoping that there is some ruling on is the fair notice aspect of it, because there would be some leeway for them to kind of slide in under the fair notice if they're saying Ripple didn't give fair notice. But there still would be some material differences. They like, well, yeah, Ripple didn't give fair notice, but they didn't have an ICO. And then you still have those dynamics. So it's not a carte blanche that it would help set a precedent for the other crypto cases by far. So yeah, that's the answer to that. As far as the dropping of the case, there are certain rules of procedure in federal court where after you get a certain point in a case, if you try to drop it, right, the judge could still have some definitive ruling on the case. So it's not an absolute that they can just back out. But that would be a bad circumstance, as Karma kind of put it out, because you end up in this place where you really don't have any clarity either way. Now, of course, Ripple could continue business, people could continue trading because you're still back into that gray area, but it's still not the ultimate thing that we want is clarity. So just hope that helps.
And I'm curious what folks think, because I truly don't know the answer. But what's the okay? So 2015, FinCEN, whatever, they called XRP a digital currency. All right. Then fast forward a couple years, and all of a sudden, Bitcoin, Ethereum are commodities. Is it preferable to be a commodity, or is it preferable to be a currency?
Okay, to answer that question, it's not a one size fit all, right? Because they have different regulators who are vying for the right to regulate the assets. So in the context of if the Securities Exchange Commission has any jurisdiction over your asset, you want to be classified as a commodity, so that then it would go over to the CFTC and you wouldn't have those issues, right? So right now, I haven't even heard many people mention, like, if a currency is going to be an option, it's really just come down to securities or commodities. But to get away from being under SEC, you definitely want to fall in the commodities basket, because if you fall in out of the commodities basket, they're going to throw you in the securities basket and you fall right under the SEC.
But if they throw you into the currency basket, then you would fall under the Treasury, I believe.
You could, but that's what I was saying. There's no talk of none of these digital assets being considered a currency at this point in time. So the only kind of binary option that we have at this point in any of the proposed bills or even proposed regulations and how they're using it, you're either going to be security or commodity at this point.
Oh, Kishta, I was aware of the ideas that all cases are different, but here's the thing. Like, Ripple won't use the Hinman speech, and Hinman speech was about Ethereum. Ethereum was ICO. If Ripple used the Hinman speech to corner the SEC, actually the project that had ICO is most likely would use the Ethereum case to corner the SEC. Does that make sense? So I was aware of your point. It just, I see it like, okay, if Ripple could use it, actually the project that has ICO could have used it too, you know?
Well, Egyptian, to counter that point, it doesn't matter what anyone else has done in the space. The regulators will do what the regulators want to do. And you can't say, oh, look how you're treating this guy, because it's not about the treatment. It's just about whether or not they were following the rules or not. The SEC was following the rules during that treatment process.
But the problem is we don't have rules. And so in some instances, if they establish rules through the court, then it does help to establish some rules that then would set some precedents, right? So there is precedence if the court rules any particular way that could be used as precedents to argue a case, but it would still come down to, like you're saying, the actual material information in those cases, right? So Egyptian, to kind of go back to your point, right? Ripple is not trying to catch a catch-22 in the emails to say, well, Ethereum was an ICO and got a pass, so I can get a pass. What they're really trying to say with the emails is that, first of all, there may be some information in there that is already established that XRP was not a security. Okay. Second of all, what they're trying to nail them down is, if you are going to say that Ethereum is a non-security, then there has to be some metrics by which you use to determine, right, whether and how it became a non-security. And so they want that information public. So then, from a material basis, they could then argue, I am not a security based on the Howey test and the metrics that you have established, because I am decentralized, I am X, I am Y, I'm Z.
Yeah,
right. So it's
disagreeing here.
I can promise you, Kashta, that I could have participated in the Ethereum pre-sale, but it just smelled too much like an unregistered security.
It was. So it wasn't like it didn't smell like it. It was.
Like an ICO. Yeah. What okay, you changed the letter P to a C?
But they're not arguing that Karma, though. They're not arguing that that Ethereum was not an ICO at one time. And so from the actual language of the Hinman speech, they even allude to it, right? It says we're basically saying that they're not a security anymore, right? And so that's what I'm saying. Like, at some point, the whole industry is trying to put the SEC into a corner to say, okay, you've already come out and indicated in this slick way that Ethereum is no longer a security, right? So we need published information at how you came to that determination. And the SEC is refusing at any means to give up that information, to the point where Gary Gensler is now backsliding off of the opinion that ETH is even a commodity and it may be a security. So
that's very,
not
what's the term? Sus or something, I think is what people say now. Like, it is very sus.
Yeah.
Isn't that like suspect or like suspicious, or I don't know what that stands for actually. But
yeah, we are not disagreeing. We are saying the same thing. What I'm saying is, other crypto would use the same thing. Okay, what is the criteria you actually made you give the judgment that Ethereum is not a security? Even if they are ICO, they would use the same argument. That it's the same. We're basically saying the same thing. Yeah.
Cool.
I'm telling you, I never ever got that feeling when I like first got some XRP and whatever, which I mean, I'm literally doing just to test things out and see if this was actually functional or like actually worked, because I kind of didn't believe it, to be honest. But with Ethereum, it totally felt like a security.
Yeah. Again, when did you first start buying XRP, Karma?
Like 13, 14 in there.
Okay, so in 2013 and 14, even though it may not have felt like you were buying a security, you were probably 99% participating in an unregistered security situation when you were participating in 2013, right? So kind of regardless of the field, they were both securities in 2013.
The difference was, and this is a big difference in my opinion, maybe not legally, but just, my opinion. The difference was nobody from the Ripple community was like shilling XRP, right? It was like, here's this technology, like it's new, it does more than Bitcoin D. It's got this DEX thing. The conversations were more around working out, like, how do we use this thing? What even is it? Like, let's understand it. Versus when the Ethereum thing, it was like, give us a bunch of Bitcoin and we're going to make this great new thing, this great shiny object, right? With smart contracts and all this stuff, which frankly, I believe those ideas came from the Ripple team. But anyway, it was just the way the behavior of the actors was very different. And when you look at like the XRP ledger, like it was already fully functional. It did all this stuff. I'm really being honest, man. I didn't believe it could do all this stuff. Okay, I'd been looking for software that could do some of this for a couple of years at that point, and I couldn't find anything. And the idea that they were going to allow all, and then give it away open source, like I was like, dude, these guys are either full of shit or smoking crack, right? Like this is there's no way they're giving away this much functionality for free on GitHub. And so I tested it out, and I mean everything worked, so that was interesting. That was like you could tell the people that were involved knew what they were talking about. Like, it wasn't like people were saying crazy stuff like Michael Saylor. Like, get out of here, dude.
Yeah, no, I think I definitely get your point, right? Because in the early days, there wasn't a whole lot of promotion as to potential use of XRP and the enterprise use, like ODL wasn't built and all of that, right? It was just so early that it was another alternative currency amongst the other alternative currencies that had been created at that time. And it was just how...
The only other was Bitcoin. There was Bitcoin, and then there was XRP Ledger.
Yeah, you said like 2013, 2014. So Litecoin was around. There was a few other coins that were around in that area, right? So
it was just a fork of Bitcoin code.
I'm just saying. So, but the general sentiment at that time was just like, we have all these potential alternative currencies, and how can we use them, and who wants to use them, right? There wasn't this whole lot of potential utility conversation around the ledger, right? And so it probably felt that way. I'm just saying from a legal perspective, though, it was definitely a security back in those days. So it just is what it is.
That we'll let the courts and the lawyers, hash that out. I can tell you that it never felt like a from the Ripple community, it never felt versus the Ethereum community. I mean, I was there, like, dude, it just felt like these guys were just raising money. I mean, which is nothing wrong with raising money. Ripple raised money. They just did it from venture capitalists, like legally with registered Reg D filing and with the SEC, right? I mean, that's how you normally raise money. The Ethereum was like,
no, I get your point, but it just has nothing to do with the raising aspect of it, right? What made XRP a security 2013-2014 window is that anybody that was engaging in it was only basically enabled to engage with it based on the efforts of Ripple. There was no decentralization at that time. They were the only player. So you would have had to have been relying on the efforts of Ripple at that time. And in that context, legally speaking, it is 100% a security.
To back your point up, back then, yeah, pretty much. I mean, there was maybe one or two other dudes that were not at Ripple, but like Circrum and another guy, I forget his name, but yeah, I mean, they ran the full UNL. So back then, the criticisms that Ripple was centralized were fair criticisms. That didn't mean the technology was centralized. It meant that, the aspect of the UNL was centralized because basically Ripple ran all the validators. But that's not a criticism of the technology itself, because, like, look at it now. Like, they don't run all the validators. That also doesn't mean they don't have influence today. Certainly they have influence. I mean, how many number of brains, like in the intro to these chats, we talk about increasing the number of brains that understand this stuff. Okay, how many brains in the world are there? Riddle me this, somebody, just give me a number. How many brains are there out there in the world that you think really understand how this technology works?
Yeah, that'd be kind of hard to ascertain, right? Because there's so many people that may understand it. They're just quiet, don't participate in kind of social media for me to have any way of determining who's who. But from a public perspective, yeah, it certainly is a very limited group of people. I would agree with you.
Yeah, a bunch of them work at Ripple. So, I mean, there's others that work at other places and do other things. I wouldn't count, like, I wouldn't count ledgerscale. I've got a lot of learning to do, but we're at least in touch with several of the people that actually know how stuff works. So that's good. Very few people, man. I would think maybe a couple dozen. There's 35 validators. So you got to say, okay, how many people does it take to run a validator? Well, you got to at least have a small team. So
just remember, there's more than the 35, though. That's just the UNL. So there are a lot of other people who are running validators that are outside the UNL, just for clarity.
Well, that's true. There's a couple hundred if you want to go to, like, listening nodes instead of validating nodes. I mean, there can't be more than 1,000, 1,500 sounds a little high.
I mean, I would definitely say it's limited, but also it's limited in two different perspectives, right? There's a limited from the perspective of, like, how Ripple intends to use the technology, right? And understanding the business model and vision that they have and how to plug into it and further that, right? And so that's definitely a very limited pool. But I think you get into a bigger pool when you just talk about the bare coding aspect of the XRP ledger aspect of it, right? Because there are probably a lot of people out there that are competent. They just, choose to be Ethereum developers, or they choose to be some of these other developers for whatever reason. But I think from a tech perspective, there's probably a little bigger group of people that could get it. But as far as understanding the business model and tying it with the tech, I would certainly agree with you that pool gets much smarter. But you made an important point that I just want to touch on. I'm going to let Mike speak. A lot of times what frustrates me is that the argument that you kind of articulated when people don't understand the technology back in those days would say, yeah, see, that's centralized. Yeah, see, that's centralized. They have all the nodes. And at that time, they were probably correct. But what frustrated me was that was not a limitation of the technology itself, like you just said, because it was able, as it was designed, to decentralize, right? It would be different if the way that the network was designed, that it had to remain centralized and there was no way to actually scale it and decentralize it. But the mechanism to decentralize it was always there. It just needed to mature to that point. So like a lot of people have always made the case about Bitcoin. Well, yeah, if Satoshi and I forgot the guy's name, Sal Heine or whoever he was, and a few other, 2 or 3 people who just happened to get in the circle who got past the memo that Bitcoin was being mined, was still very centralized if it was just 4 or 5 people, even if it was 10 people, right? It wasn't until it grew and then had hundreds of nodes and hundreds of miners, and it just kept growing till it became the decentralization secure network that people touted to be now. But it wasn't always that way, and every network starts that way.
Well, I agree with you. I like to think sometimes, or at least try and apply like a human lifetime framework or analogy to industries, companies, etc., technologies. And yeah, I mean, I think everybody beaten up on the XRP ledger for being centralized, which was a reasonable criticism back then. It's a lot like making fun of a 5-year-old for not having the skills of a 50-year-old. Right? Like, it's unreasonable to expect a 5-year-old to be as competent as a 50-year-old. It's just completely unreasonable. I mean, it's actually kind of mean to beat up on a 5-year-old, right? Like, why would you do that? But it was at the time. I mean, it legitimately was. Ripple Labs at the time ran all the validators, and they controlled the UNL. They only put themselves on it, but dude, there was still stuff getting worked out back then. People were still trying to figure out, like, what even is this technology? Like, how is it even applicable? What do you apply it to? What industry? What is this value? Why is this useful? Why is this network even useful? And so I think it was actually pretty reasonable. Like, I say often, it's the way you create value is reducing risk. Well, they reduced a lot of risk by it's basically the wayfinding process. So during the wayfinding process, which was a multi-year process, figuring this stuff out. What the hell do we do? What is this? What do we do with this? During that wayfinding process, they had all the validators. Once they kind of got things figured out, then you started seeing other validator operators being added to the UNL, and now there's hundreds of node operators, but there's a difference between a node and a validator.
Yeah, guys, can you give Mike a chance to speak?
Well, the reason why I didn't interrupt is because I'm kind of changing the subject with the question, but I was listening to some crypto OGs talking earlier today, Simon Dixon and a few others, and they were saying in 2017 XLM had like an inflationary hack, and they printed a bunch of extra XLM.
It's not
And
hack.
I didn't really get like deep into that, but if that can happen to XLM, could something like that happen to XRP? And like, what's the difference in the security structure?
Was it hacked because actually Stellar had an inflation mechanism into it, and they changed it like a couple of years ago? You know,
That was
Right.
the first thing. That was the first thing. Basically, when Jed left Ripple, he started his quote secret Bitcoin project, which actually had nothing to do with Bitcoin D. And essentially, Stellar started out as Ripple D with inflation.
Yeah,
That
so
was-
to answer your question, Mike, there's a piece of code, I forgot what it's actually called now, so I apologize. But it's almost like an invariant checker. And so it constantly checks the status of the ledger so that no additional XRP can ever be recreated like that. So there's actually a coding mechanism that Davis mentions that prevents that from ever happening.
Yep, correct. They added that in later on, probably around the same time frame like you're talking about, probably 16, 17, somewhere in that. Because they did a double check. So you have all the normal code, and then when a transaction happens, there's a double check, and there's a technical term for that, but it's basically functionally a double check to make sure no XRP is being created.
Just to say something controversial, okay? I think actually, like a cryptocurrency with inflation is the best suited to be like the reserve currency of the world. If some people believe in this shit, I do not believe in any crypto to be a reserve currency, but I think a currency with like inflation 2 or 3% is better than a currency without inflation or with deflation. But that's my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, that would be an interesting discussion because I could definitely see pros and cons to both sides. But
Yep.
just to rewind to one of the things we were just talking about, we can always go back to that Egyptian. Think about the amount of trust that you have to have and the respect that we should give people for doing what they ultimately did. Because I guarantee you can't name another project or another company in the world ever that would essentially have been sitting on what could have been at one time over $100 billion worth of assets in reserve and put all of those assets at the mercy of other people. So when they started passing out those other people and allowing them to become UNL members and removing their own validators at the same time to the point where they become non-vetoed members and had no unilateral control, that took a tremendous amount of trust to turn over $100 billion, potentially $100 billion worth of assets to a network that you no longer control. So I applaud Ripple for making that decision when everybody hounds them for being scamish and dumping and this and that. Show me where anybody else is willing to put a potential 100 billion or more in assets, if you consider future value, at the mercy of other people. And that gives you everything that you need to know about Ripple.
I think you're correct. That takes some balls. Also, look at the network structure. And someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, XRP Ledger is deflationary, right? Every day, right now, on this chat, people are doing transactions on Ledger. Every time a transaction is done, XRP gets burned, and there's no more getting created. On Ethereum, they create more. Yes, they also burn some. On Flare, they have inflation, which I think makes sense because you're compensating the FTSOs for their data feeds, which is valuable to the networks. The network should pay for that. That makes sense.
If somebody watched Crypto Eri video today, it's a short video for like a minute and a half, and she has it has a video of Naveen Gupta. He's talking about like in Asia that they actually building more nodes, building out nodes and real volume. So it's a short video, it's like a minute and a half, and I actually recommend people to watch it.
Yeah,
I
I did
sort of
see it.
have a. Go ahead, Kash. I want to switch the subject.
No, go ahead. I was just telling him I did see it. It was I was impressed by the $15 billion total run rate that they're at. So the volume is definitely increasing, and I've been watching it through another metric, so I'm following it, pretty intensely. And the majority of the volume now, impressively, is ODL denominated, whether it's Korea, because we know that remittances are being done there, Japan, Europe, British pound, Australia, South Africa. Like I've been tracking them. So ODL is definitely becoming the majority of the volume on the network. And I think that is very important because historically speaking, the top cryptos or means of value that were percentages of these assets were 60 to 70% tether at one time. Like every asset, particularly in the top assets, were denominated 60 to 70 some odd percent tether alone. And I'm talking about for years, y'all. I track this stuff. So it tells you everything that you need to know about these assets and who are participating in the price discovery.
So let
The
me ask
next,
something,
hold on, just a minute, Egyptian. The
Okay,
next big asset that participated in those volumes was Bitcoin. So for a long time, Bitcoin remained number 2 asset by volume in all of these assets. So they became the number 1 influence in the price discovery of every asset, right? Ethereum weighs in the top 10 in a lot of these assets, maybe even top 5 in a lot of these assets, right? And then you start having your national currencies. Your national currencies is always highly denominated in a dollar. Always, every asset, right? So the dollar is still the world reserve currency, even within crypto, right? Especially if you take into consideration derivatives like Tether, USDC, Binance, USD, right? The dollar is dominating this space as it applies to price discovery for every asset. The most unique thing that I find about that information, because I've been tracking it for years, is that even at the height of Tether's influence, it was always the lowest by volume amongst like Bitcoin, Ethereum, ADA, Solana, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So they were never pumping as much Tether into XRP, and it goes to make sense, right? Because it wasn't pumping the same way those assets were. Bitcoin remained a very high one in XRP and a lot of these, so it has always had influence. But I think, and my speculation is that is how the Bitcoiners were using to maintain a grasp over this market. So when we always say the market follows Bitcoin, the reason it's following Bitcoin because they had so much wealth early in this space and were the biggest players in this space before corporates and anybody else came along, that at the height of these markets, they could pump billions down into these coins, buy up the supply, cash out at the top with no hesitation, back into their Bitcoin, grow their Bitcoin bags. When as soon as they remove their liquidity from the altcoin dropped to shit, and then they could recycle and do it all again with their money. So they have maintained their dominance by that mechanism, right, for a long time. And the encouraging point is that Bitcoin has now slipped down to around 6, 7, 8 on any given day as far as XRP volumes. So it is now breaking that influence of XRP price discovery. Tether is down in the 40s, so that is breaking. But we do still have a big dollar influence, and so we'll have to see how that plays out. But the encouraging thing is that utility is taking over the volume. So let's see how that plays out over time.
I like your KPIs, dude.
Okay, Karma, let me ask you a question. Sorry. So, do you care about the volume at the current time right now? Do you care more about the volume for the XRP or for the amount or for the number of nodes?
Well, it depends on what you're saying. Do I care about the growth of the nodes, or do I care more about the volumes on the network? Is that your question?
Yeah, which one is more priority right now?
So that's hard to answer because as it applies to price, that's right?
Like
hold on.
Correct.
Yeah. Yes, as it applies to price, right? And because of course I've told everybody I'm a trader, right? So as it applies to price, I'm always kind of paying attention to the volumes and how it influences and who influences this network. So I think that's a very pertinent metric for me. The amount of nodes on the network are not as important to me specifically as an individual, because I know that there's enough of them out there that we have a robust ledger. So I'm not worried about the robustness of it. If I were designing a project of any sort that I wanted to get onto the ledger and into the community, then I would definitely be more focused on making sure that my node infrastructure, right, could run parallel with everyone else's and sync up. And so I'd be more concerned with that. But yeah, it's a kind of a dual answer. It's hard for me to pick one side or the other, just depending on what the case is.
It's a in a goofy way, it's a little bit of a chicken and egg problem.
Yep.
Like, you want to have the liquidity because that creates utility. I mean, the only utility that Bitcoin has is liquidity. Outside of that, it doesn't do anything. And Cashta, you're dead right. At least back in the day, all the liquidity flowed through Bitcoin. All of it. It didn't matter which project you were talking about, Ethereum, yada yada. Everything went through. You wanted Litecoin, everything you wanted XRP. Well, you could get XRP through dollars, but you because I've never touched Bitcoin, and I won't. But yeah, that was the whole market. Everything funneled through Bitcoin. Everything, every single project, like everything.
There is this. Let's get our side or something because I think he's got what Uphold. Yeah.
Yeah, it's also actually it's Ivan. It's my alias or my street name, I guess. But yeah, I want to talk in regards to the Uphold issue. I don't know if people noticed, but I was exchanging some XRP for I forgot what it was, but as soon as I did it, it went through. But then I went back to like and check the market, and I saw a bunch of freaking currencies being blocked from withdrawing and exchanging. It was only Ethereum that I saw that wasn't blocked, and then I checked 1 minute later, and then it was blocked. So I tried to look up information on their Twitter account. I tried to look up news articles. I couldn't find anything. So I don't know if anybody has information on what happened.
There's no information out yet, but they blocked. Yeah, it did halted tradings of pretty much all the assets that was on through Uphold, but it's all working now. But I because I use Uphold too, and I noticed all of it wasn't just one asset; was their whole system that halted.
I've been monitoring the situation, and it seems like people are complaining, but then the Uphold Twitter account would go back. I was like, oh, everything is working now. But when I look at Twitter now, it seems like people still has issue.
I don't know now.
Well,
Mine
I
is
would
working
like
good
to
now
know.
though.
Yeah,
Thank you, 808, for that update because I hadn't used it today, so that's good to know. But I was mentioning the other day that I did get the email from them because I am a VIP member, and so they are making a lot of technical changes to the
Plenty
way that they are
changes.
doing.
Me
Yeah,
too.
the way that they're doing stuff down to facial recognition and everything else, right? So it was probably just some things that had to go down to get some things improved or something, because they are making a shit ton of changes.
But that doesn't make sense.
That it sounds like like I know a guy who he was a top dude in a health insurance company, and they realized there was a problem, and they had to take the system down in order to do an update. And the CTO was like, I mean, this is like mid-afternoon, and it was a big potential vulnerability, and the CTO's like, just shut the whole system down.
Yeah, that's sort of what I wanted to bring up for an update to be done in the morning hours. It doesn't seem right, especially for a technology type of company. I know, I'm in the IT field, so we usually schedule updates, off peak hours, middle of the night. So unless Karma is right, where this was like a hot fix and there was some sort of vulnerability, I definitely think Uphold should be making some sort of announcement. But yeah, at first
I
I thought
believe there will
it could
be,
be a hardware update or maybe software update. But it's like, oh man, it's in the middle of the day. People like trading at this time. So
to me, it
$5
was
worth
early
on
this
Uphold.
morning.
Crap.
And I don't trade on Uphold though. I wouldn't recommend trading on Uphold because it's not really an exchange, yeah. Not unless it's
Yeah,
buy
you
and
get
hold kind of thing. But
yeah.
you wouldn't want to use it as a trading because it's fees and the extra baggage that they have in the back end as well.
Good
I
point,
use it
808.
I use it as an on and off ramp kind of thing for me. Especially they call you our Costa with it being VIP because I'm in Hawaii. Upholds in a sandbox. So I've been communicating with them to make sure that they're upbeat with our extension with the sandbox in our financial sector in our state. because some other people is getting emails from other entities that work here, but they don't have a certain licensing, money transmitter licensings in Hawaii, so they would have to stop their business being an issuer of crypto in Hawaii without that licensing. But they extended the sandbox, so yeah.
Thank you for that. I want to give Digital a chance to jump in here, but yeah, thank you for that, 808.
Hey, how you doing today? So
We all good, bro.
So I had a question about the data-driven software as crypto is going so fast these days. How it can go point to point one, point A to point B, and secure and efficient, and also go into cross-border payments and everything. But I was thinking about this: how much faster it could be in the future to travel across the country, the world, in areas that it's impossible sometimes to communicate. Sometimes people who live in villages or people who have areas that don't have internet or any type of services to connect with. I think that the question of mine is, how much faster you think those local areas that have no type of civilizations, they don't have technology, how are they going to be able to access to technology like this to be a
Great
part
question.
of the internet value?
Great question, Digital. See, yeah.
It's a good question. Two things. Pretty much every single central bank looking at CBDC has offline transactions as a requirement. Okay, so like the power's out, the internet's out, you still have to be able to transact. I think the idea is to do NFC type stuff for that, or the QR code type method. But the other thing is, so I actually tried to start a thing. My other company, actually, this is how it started. Is I was trying to do a global SMS payments platform. It's not really doable. But recently I spoke to someone who I'm sure everybody in here would know, who's knows what they're talking about and has looked at the similar solving a similar problem. And basically the response was, yeah, but at this point, like, even people in like the poorest places and like wherever that is already have smartphones. So you can use an app which solves some of the problems that the SMS methods were incapable of performing, and mainly signing the friggin' transaction. And I was like, oh, well, if that's the case, then okay. I guess that's the direction the world's going. So, even if you have a smartphone, it doesn't have internet, if you have like two of them next to each other, like physically, then you can use the QR code method. You could use the NFC method. There's ways to solve the offline transaction thing. And then, whenever those phones get back in touch with the internet or the network, then, those payments can get settled. It's not so much unlike sending a Interledger protocol receipt, right? It's like, hey, like, I've got $100 in this payment channel. Like, I'm going to send you $1, and you're like, cool. So then, we snap a picture of the QR code and whatever. You get a receipt to pull $1 out of my payment channel. Well, whenever you get back in touch with the internet, you get to collect the $1, right? That kind of thing. It's an important aspect, and it's not an easy thing to solve.
So the reason I asked this, and thank you, Karma, for answering some of that, because the reason why I asked this question is I was reading an article about iPhones, and they were putting new software and technology into them, how they can can still be connected to certain satellite dishes without having any services. So like
So
supposedly
you should
like
look up Blockstream because Blockstream is a company that uses satellites to send Bitcoin through their networks without the internet access. That's one thing you should to look up. It's pretty cool actually. I've been trying to dive into what else other networks uses satellite, but for at the moment, Blockstream is one of the main ones that use their networks to send Bitcoin across. It's pretty cool actually
right
using
the
satellite.
one that well thank you. So the one that the one I really was meaning to say is it's the one in XLM. And the article was talking about exactly how Tesla, SpaceX, they send all these satellite dishes up in the sky and everything, and they have private ledgers on them and satellite ledgers. So the idea that I read that they're trying to explain on the article was that supposedly if you don't have internet on your phone and all these villages, they just take up data from these dishes that is not in it's like in a lower orbit, and they just take up that information and pick it up really quickly and really efficient. So the satellite dishes that is in lower orbit, they have their own ledger, so they can do transfers back and forth. And I heard about how they can just communicate in villages and stuff like that. So I wasn't too sure that I was reading something fictional or
Through the
something was
XL, you're
really
talking about
happening.
through the XLM network. Yeah. Look
Yeah.
up
So
Kavarta. Kavarta too is another company that uses satellites and like something called DBV. Um, DVB-S and DVB-S to transponder satellites. So it's, yeah, you're not far off the bat. They use satellites and they're testing it to send crypto and stuff like that offline using devices.
and I
Yeah,
and I was
just real quick, digital. I was going to tell you, like, yeah, you're definitely hitting on a lot of people who are working on that technology. But one of the things I wanted to recommend, because this is dealing with financial inclusion, essentially, right? And this is a big thing that the Bank of International Settlements, IMF, and all of them are trying to address with the use of this technology. So I wanted to refer you to the BIS document that just came out with the 21 finalists, and you can probably Google it just like that.
I just downloaded that one.
Right. And so the thing you want to look for under that one is there's problem statement number 2, and it gives you the list of companies that are trying to address the financial inclusion. So if you look at Bit, Crunchfish, Dana, Ujma, Exolabs, Fluency, those companies probably have some write-ups on how they're trying to directly use the technology integrated into a whole system, right? Rather than just looking at the individual parts or running across an article that may be even kind of slanted by, trying to promote a particular technology. I would look at some of these iterations that are finalists and then look at how they're trying to achieve it and what technology they're using. And that probably give you a pretty good basis of what's coming down the pipe.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you for answering some information I needed, because I think this is going to be a very important thing because liquidity and accessibility and speed, the transfer of information is going to be important for the next, future of data efficiently, technology. So, it's always good to hear somebody else's point of view of that.
You
Thank you very
can't have liquidity. It's like impossible mechanically to have or create liquidity without connections. So if you don't have connections, then you're not part of the network. So like the network connectivity is a very foundational, critical element. And SOF, you got your hand up there.
Okay, guys, I have a question for you. The exchange who.com actually disappeared. It was an exchange and the website disappeared. Should I buy the domain or no? I can buy it for $70 now. Should I buy it or no? Or there is legal issue if I buy it?
Who.com, like WHO?
No, it's HOO.com. I put the tweet
I'll
about
tell
it.
you what, man. Any domain that's only 3 letters long is valuable. So if you can get it for $70,
I'm gonna buy it. Okay.
I mean, back in the day, there were people that just bought every domain that was 2 letters long and 1 letter, and then
But
it
I'm
went to 3
saying
letters.
they go on bankrupt. Or basically it's like a Ponzi scheme now, because they just exit scam. Is there is legal issue if I bought it? You know,
But how did they get the 3-letter domain, dude? Those are usually pretty expensive.
I don't know. I'm just gonna buy it. Whatever happen. I don't know.
SOF? Soft?
Yeah. SOF, you got your hand up there?
Yeah, hey, I was just going to go back to isn't when it comes with cell phones and blockchain, isn't Cello that blockchain? Aren't they dealing with that? And then also SpaceX and Starlink, aren't they working on for global internet communication?
Yeah. Starlink is what when he was talking, that's what I was thinking. That makes sense.
That's correct. That's what I meant.
Another one is good to look up would be Space Chain. They have been working on satellite network too, and using space as a service for modern businesses, which is pretty cool.
Some of this stuff, though, you got to think of networks of networks. This is the from Complexity Land. No, what's the term? A multiplex, or you could call it a complex adaptive system, but I think multiplex is probably the better word. But it's like networks, like say you got one network, like a data network, like the internet. Okay, then you got another network, like say a movie studio or like a Netflix. Then you got another network like a XRP ledger or a bank or hospital. One of those, what do you call them? I guess the insurance companies in some sense, but the HMOs or something like that. And anyway, you start stacking these networks on top of each other. They all get interconnected. The picture starts getting fuzzy pretty quick. It's hard to analyze all this stuff and see clearly. Now you've got the hardware network, so you've got your tier 1 routers like your AT&Ts and Comcasts, your Starlinks like we were talking a minute ago. That's going to be tied in with all these other dude, the picture gets like hard to understand real quick. But like that's the reality of it. Like, all these things are interconnected. All of them. All of it. And the consumers, you got your social networks like your Facebooks, and the other ones, Twitter. We're all on Twitter here, right? Yeah, it's a real, it's a thing. I don't know if there's any single person, well, certainly not a single person, but any entity, even like group of people that could fully understand all the connections. I mean, Google's probably, because they track, they do the graph, their graph or their topology that they do is the backlinks is primarily. I mean, there's more than that, but dude, it's an impossible task. I mean, it's certainly a task worth going after, right? But it's not a task you're going to actually achieve.
Karma, sorry to interrupt. So like those protocols or those ledgers that does like computer to computer and they communicate with each other. No human interaction, just computer to computer. are those going to be the ones that be driving that type of network or those type of spaces? Because if when it gets so complex and so so connected to so many different entities or different resources, humans can't process all the information. So those protocols that do like computer to computer will be the most valuable ones as well, right?
Yeah, in some sense, and this is where I think, and this isn't really a thing yet, but it will be, or it will become a thing. The machine-to-machine payments. So let's say you run a service and your machines do a thing, and I need the thing that your machines do. Okay, and I got to pay you for it. So now I have my machines consume the thing that your machines do, and then I pay you. That makes sense, like if I have a plumber come over and they fix the thing, then they came over, they did the thing, and then I pay, you pay them. And so, yeah. And I think that's going to speed up, this is going to grow the economic pie, which is very important. That's a desirable, good thing. And so when I hear folks make analogies and they say, oh, well, there's this much money in the Nostro Vostro accounts, or this many trillion in, remittance, or this many trillion in cross-border flow, or this many trillion in whatever, that's today, man. That's not tomorrow. Tomorrow, there's going then the volume of transactions will grow likely at the same rate. So like, let's say you make a 10x reduction. It's actually more than that, but let's say you make a 10x reduction in the cost per transaction, and cost can be denominated in both time and actual dollars or whatever currency. Then you're going to get at least a 10x. It wouldn't to think anyway that you would get at least a 10x increase in the volume of transactions. I know it's a little bit weird, but like I have a supplier, I pay them, quarters of a penny at a time, half a penny, depending on what they do. I can't do that with the current infrastructure. It's just absolutely not possible. So what happens is almost exactly like the Nostro Vostro. I end up floating a bunch of money, and then I pay them, quarters of a penny at a time, right? Like, but I got to front the money. Versus you enter a world where all those transactions can occur, but I don't really have to front the money. I can keep the money in my account, and then every time I owe them a quarter penny, I send them a quarter of a penny. That's fine. And I think that you'll see the economic activity explode. The volume of transactions explode. I think you're also going to see the connectivity between all these financial networks more or less explode. We've got to get regulation, though.
Just real quick, Karma. So, and with that being said, like, do you think it's for the company that is the potential user of the network to move value around, right? Would the Nostro Vostro, though, still probably be one of the biggest incentives, right, to use the network if you're one of these large movers of value to be able to recapture the locked capital that you had locked?
Yeah, I mean it's just essentially saying is a higher degree of capital efficiency desirable? Well, obviously, yes.
Yeah, because I think that's one of the biggest prospects for me is like, I know if I was in their situation, right, and I imagine you could pull up the figures and figure out almost down to a few dollars, right, what the pros and cons are of it, right? But even if I'm, because again, some of these big people were the ones that were actually charging the people for the transactions, so they're going to lose some revenue because you've made the transactions so cheap, right? But I'm still going to benefit from the potential hundreds of billions of dollars that I no longer have to keep tied up, can use that for investment purposes to grow the business. So I think that becomes the biggest incentive to go ahead and say, I need to free up and repatriate the capital back in house.
Well, I'm not gonna lie. Okay, and I'm a relatively optimistic person. Not that I'm skeptical, but I'm relatively optimistic. I hope, at least I see the potential for this technology. Okay, so go big macro picture, global. Because this is a global situation with crypto. This isn't just the US or Europe or Japan or China. Like, this is a global situation. So we've got the central banks in each jurisdiction, yada yada, are all gonna have to, when however they choose to do so. I guess we're calling it quantitative, basically, pull liquidity out of the system. My hope is that these technologies can, okay, so you pull some liquidity out of the system. All right, cool. But if you simultaneously, say, use these technologies to improve the flow of that liquidity that's left in the system, maybe you don't end up with such a bad end result.
Which place are you describing as the liquidity being removed from the system? Just so I can have some clarity on that.
Well, central banks. I'm more interested in the bond market than the interest rate, but the interest rates there's different mechanisms that can be used to pull liquidity out of the system. But if you pull some liquidity out of the system, but then improve the capacity of the system to enable flow, then maybe, cross your fingers, hopefully, if those two things can counterweight each other, then maybe you don't have a super duper recession or anything. This is why I think this stuff with the SEC is just absolutely asinine. I mean, it's self-defeating. The proper thing would be to get this stuff approved ASAP and get it in place, allow the central banks to do what they, I think, need to do. But, what they need to do is going to be bad for the economy, aka pulling liquidity out of the system. And then you've got these systems sitting here on the sideline only because, the referee won't let the player on the field. Well, and the referee really hasn't figured out what the rules of the game are either. So there's that. That's kind of an issue. But
hold on just a second. I'm gonna tell you what's been more of the problem, I think, when it comes down to them pulling the trigger and getting this stuff rolled out to make the improvements that you're speaking of, right? They really still do not know how they want to design their CBDC. Like, this is what the delay is all about. How am I actually going to pull the trigger and put this into a platform or build a platform around the idea, right?
Well,
and the reason I say that, hold on, go ahead.
Look up the e-money thing from the Boston Fed.
No, I've seen it, but this is what the reason I'm saying this specifically though is because if you really look at, and I'm gonna get you in Digital C, I'm gonna make it quick. But the reason I'm saying this is because if you look at the conversation from a global perspective, like you're talking about, it has been articulated publicly that China has positioned themselves to be a real competitor for the global economy of the future. But what is impeding them from taking that step and actually running and profiting off of it is the fact that it's such a closed and controlled environment. So they're saying that the rest of the world has become so used to and attached and ingrained in the concept of freedom that even trying to think that they're going to adopt the Chinese model, even though it's already on DLT and it's quicker, faster, efficient, it's just not going to happen because people are not going to accept the capital controls that China keeps in the hands of China, right? So when they're trying to design the American CBDC at this particular time, they already know, and I'm telling you, I'm guaranteeing you, I've heard the conversation, they already know that the only way that they're going to be able to compete on a global stage with a CBDC iteration is that thing has to have so much freedom and privacy baked into the code itself that is able to be a counter to the capital controls that China has built into their code. And it reaffirms the freedoms that American and the rest of the world have been trying to promote for 100 and some odd years, right? The problem is, just like everyone knows here, we always speculate that if they create this CBDC, it's going to be something that they have to have tight control over. That they're going to want this control, and Fed's not going to want to give control. The central bank's not going to give up control, and da 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 da. And that is a real dynamics. And I think they're trying to figure out how do we even create this actual freedom in the protocol to make it competitive and make it a true thing that they want it to be. Or if not create the freedoms into the protocol, how do they create the illusions of the freedoms in the protocol, right, that allow it to operate on that level, either or. And I don't think that they found the solution to that problem yet, right? And so until they can fix that and figure out how they're going to do that in order to compete with the China iteration, then we're having this stalled moment till they can figure out what's going to work best. So I think that's really what's taking so long.
Well, I want to let Digital speak up, but I think zero knowledge proofs methodologies are probably the solution, or at least the best one that I'm aware of. Maybe it's not the ultimate solution, but I think it's the best I'm aware of. Wrap that into these protocols, and then things can start. You can start.
Who ultimately got the trigger to pull the key to have the control, though? That's the question, right? Are they going to be able to shut off your account at will at any given moment because they're controlling the network, right, and block your account off? Or is it going to be some semblance of decentralization, right? And so those capital controls are not built in from a code perspective. Like, I think that is the question that needs to be answered, and nobody's really talking about it. But I guarantee you it's being discussed in the back rooms. Go ahead, Digital C.
It's always hush hush about that. So that what you were saying earlier about how data is going to be back and forth and able to take out money out of payments and transfer all that information and being just into the middle of technology just to transfer that. No, I believe I think it's going to be quant and OTA, I think IOTA. Yes, I think I'm saying it right. So I think those two is going to be a very important or very essential things it's going to be just able to transfer information back and forth. And I've been looking at those two a lot because those are like like I said, the glue or like the sewing, the stitching of making all these different data transfers back and forth faster and really quick, because I think those it has to have something like those are like the roads that are being built so data can be transferred back and forth easily and efficiently with these other tokens and all these other assets to be able to make contracts, to make deals, make transfers. But also I kind of like fear the same way that you were saying too, because those might be the same ones can actually be giving out the information to block information, blackmail, like blacklist addresses, because you gotta question it, because not everything is not gonna be free. Freedom isn't free, and especially here in America. But so I think sometimes those are the critical ones that you gotta look for. Like, which technology is gonna be, it's gonna be supporting that, or is gonna prevent stuff like that in the future to happen. And I think those two are gonna be a very important two key ones. I might be wrong, but I'm just looking at it that way. And if you have another point of view, let me know, because that's like, these are the essential things that's going to be important in the future.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. I think well, anyway, just a heads up. If anybody wants to speak up, these are open forums. So I've had some people say that they're intimidated to speak up. Please don't be. Nobody's gonna. I won't let nobody's gonna ridicule you or anything. Ask all the questions. It doesn't matter what they are. But yeah, we got about 10 minutes. So if anybody wants to speak up and ask a question, please do. And if anybody wants to step down and let somebody else step up, that's fine too. Either which way. I'm not going to bump anybody down, but I think we're about it. I think no, I think we got room for another couple people. We're good.
And if you have a question and you don't want to come up and speak, you could always feel free to send one of us a direct message, and we could read it and go over the topic. And if I could ask everybody to just retweet the space and follow us at ledgerscale on Twitter and on YouTube as well.
They're all good, Death. Yeah, if you can retweet it and follow us on YouTube. These are also live streamed over there. And then yeah, ask questions, join us. Like, that's the point of the spaces, is engagement. So without you guys, there's really no purpose, or guys and girls, there's really no purpose in doing these things. I mean, the idea here is to allow people to ask questions and figure this stuff's complicated. I mean, let's be honest, it is.
Hey, Karma. Karma, I have a question, or anyone can. Sorry, anyone can answer. But what's the importance of Interledger protocol? I'm just trying to wrap my head around it, and just wonder if you guys could explain it more so.
Yeah, big time. I actually shared a video earlier today.
Yeah, I watched a little bit of it, but I didn't have the time to finish it out. But yeah, I appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries, man. Even though that's a little bit of an older video, the fundamentals don't change. So it's in the name, the first word, Interledger. Okay, so think of internet, right? So what is internet? It's a network of networks. I mean, we were just talking about this a minute ago. Interledger, okay, consider ledgers basically a network. So the word interledger is effectively the same as the word internet, except of value. So you're going to have all these different ledgers, whether they're banks, central banks like CBDC, crypto ledgers. I'm sure corporates are going to have their own ledgers, et cetera, et cetera. All of those things need to be connected together. And so Interledger protocol, there's obviously no token. So there's nothing to like invest in. Again, I think this falls in line with David Schwartz, the best incentive is no incentive. Like, there's no token with Interledger. You got to be actually doing real world business. So if you're doing real world business and you and I want to set up like consider my vendor, if they could, I would do it, but they can't. So anyway, I could set it up in a way where we send them a quarter of a penny every time they run an API call for us, right? So and I could do that and through Interledger, you've got Interledger connectors. There's a whole thing with that. That's a different actor in the system, but or in the network, but they're the liquidity provider. But yeah, like you can have, I can pay you and say Swahili, whatever their currency is, and you could receive, I don't know, gold, XRP, Bitcoin, dollars, euros, doesn't really matter. So it's the key, like think of, do you know what a topology is? Like a network graph, that kind of thing?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
Okay, think of that. Interledger protocol is the protocol that enables the edges, the connections. So you got a bunch of nodes, right? Like a bunch of different ledgers, Interledger. So you got a bunch of different nodes, CBDC, commercial bank, crypto, private company, whatever, individual citizen, yada yada. So the Interledger protocol is the protocol that enables all of those to connect.
Gotcha.
So it's a big deal. It really truly is. I mean, you're not going to have a healthy network if making connections is expensive. Whether it's expensive in terms of dollars or time or effort or technical expertise or what have you. The cheaper you can make the connections, the more healthy the network's going to be. Think of your body. It's a network, right? It's actually a multiplex. You got all sorts of networks. You got blood, lungs, brain, muscle, all these things, and all these networks are connected. If you start, this is what happens as you age, you start breaking down the connections between those networks, and then maybe like your heart doesn't work as good, so then your blood doesn't flow as fast, so then your muscles don't work as good, so then your brain doesn't work as good. Like it's a cascade of these things are all connected. And so Interledger protocol's that protocol. It's not a network, but it's the protocol that connects all the networks. It's really, really an important piece of the puzzle here.
Oh,
for internet.
I see now.
Uh, 808, you got your hand up, and somebody's Casta. Hang on. 808, go for it, and then we'll probably wrap up here in the next 5 minutes or so.
Oh, can you hear me? I just was going to piggyback off of what you were explaining, what Interledger protocol was, which is what you were explaining. It is to a neutral protocol for all these different types of blockchains to talk to each other, in a sense, like how we have the internet and HTTPS, how they have that language for all these different internet servers to talk to each other. This is what Interledger protocol does for transferring of money and data across borders using TCP and IP protocols, which is, in the easy terms, it's just a neutral way for them to speak to each other in order to be able to transfer data across blockchains and across ledgers.
Yeah, I think the role of the Interledger protocol connector, because that's your liquidity provider functionality, is critical. And I hope, we've had a guy on here who does that. Maybe I'll get somebody else, but we'll see. it's important to understand that aspect too, because
It's
without
a web monetization standard for everybody to be able to abide by, kind of thing.
it does enable the web monet. I mean, you couldn't have like Coil without Interledger protocol. I don't think you could have is it Kava without Interledger protocol. I'm pretty sure they're use that technology. Most of these companies, man, they're going to end up on this Interledger protocol, like Visa, MasterCard, the central banks, and all the rest. Watch what happens. It's going to take a couple years, but watch what happens. They're all going to end up on Interledger protocol. It's already done.
Just
It's
look
already
who owns the rights to that already, and who has those rights.
The Ripple gifted them to the W3C, and so they're basically public at this point. It's also already integrated with all the major browsers. That's a few years ago. I've been surprised actually that we haven't seen more development, because I mean I think they got it
Whoever's using
integrated.
Uphold, you also have Interledger protocol on Uphold all the way at the bottom when you're transferring your funds.
Well, that makes sense because Uphold's not an exchange itself, right? So it has to communicate with other exchanges where there's liquidity. Like Uphold's not a liquidity. You can't go get liquidity at Uphold. Like they'll give you access to liquidity elsewhere, but they don't run order books, as far as I know. Actually, we're having the Uphold guy on Wednesday, so maybe I'll confirm that. That's a good question. I'll write that down. Yeah, Uphold's a little different than the rest of them.
Gosh, if you want to go ahead and then I think I'm going to close out the space.
Thank you so much, Deb. So I knew that y'all were closing out, and I did want to say thank you. I wanted to reiterate what Karma said. Of course, we want to have more voices up here. So if you have gotten a response about being intimidated in any kind of way about coming up, just come on up. Like, this is a very respectful group over on this side. Nobody's gonna give you a hard time. So having your voice and opinion is very important, right? Because a lot of times, as you can see, we may seem like we know a lot of information, but we're having to surmise some of that information without knowing definitively how other people feel about that, right? So sometimes you might hear us speak in general terms and say, well, the market this and the market that. Well, you are the market and you may think differently. So it's important to go ahead and put that input in so we can get a better consensus of what those opinions really are instead of assuming them, right? And it's very important to get a female perspective, right? I know a lot of times this thing is testosterone dominated. So I would definitely like to hear more women's perspective in a lot of these spaces. So I'm encouraging women to definitely step up and, give their voice. Also, I wanted to just end it by saying I respectfully put a link up at the top because I'm going to open up my YouTube channel via Yard Stream so you can actually get in and kind of have conversation and back and forth to kind of similar to what we're doing here on Spaces, but it'll be on YouTube. And I'll have my screen to kind of present some data and information as well. So I'm inviting anyone to hit the link either on my Twitter or at the top. And you're welcome to come over there and discuss some of the data after we conclude here. So thank y'all. Have a great day.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Cash. And like, I don't mean to be sexist, but yeah, it would be nice to have more women. And I mean, there's definitely a bunch of women in crypto, but to have them speak up and like, let's hear. I mean, it's a healthy. It's a good thing, and yeah, we have gotten a little bit of feedback that maybe these spaces are intimidating. I don't think that's I certainly try and be the opposite of that.
The only
keep these.
the only intimidating one I would say that would be intimidating because he just likes to do his thing is scams. That's what I think of. I'm sorry. That's the first guy that comes to my mind when I think of intimidation for some reason.
No, I want
But
I
yes,
want to
you
keep
guys.
these things as community engagement and knowledge sharing. I learn stuff from you guys for serious. Like like really, I learn stuff from doing these spaces that I wouldn't have learned otherwise. So I mean, I'm not trying to, let's I don't know. I just It would be nice if we had more women speaking up, I think, and it's maybe a little bit of a sexist comment, but whatever. And I want everybody to speak up. And there's all kinds of questions. There's so much stuff to know with this field or this industry. Yeah, sorry. I'm kind of babbling.
So much different
seriously.
people's perspectives that can benefit what we all think. That I'm just gonna piggyback on what you guys are saying because I, for myself, has been in this space for a very long time, but just to recently was be able to actually speak about it more often, and you come to find out that not only you have a lot to share, but you have a lot to take in from others and their perspectives, and it helps you see other things in a different view, and it opens corridors and an idea. It breeds more interest from different from other people's thought processes because we all think differently and look at things differently, especially men and women. Not being sexist or anything, that's just natural fact. We don't think the same, but we all think the same towards the end goal kind of thing. We all have the same thirst for knowledge and that thrive to gain that knowledge to better ourselves.
Well,
And I
the
love
thing
hearing
is, it
everybody's
doesn't matter if
testimonies.
you're a
Bomb.
man or a woman. You're gonna end up using money, right? And so what we're experiencing here. It's so exciting to me. Is we're experiencing like a re-innovation of money and the monetary system and central bank liabilities with CBDCs. And dude, this is big stuff. Okay, but every single person, I don't care who you are, what your name is, where you live, what your nationality is, you're going to end up using money, and this is going to impact you in your life. And that's to me like super freaking exciting and cool because it's big stuff. This isn't like somebody's dog ran away, right? Or like the tide was super high today. That's irrelevant. So what? Who cares? I mean, not irrelevant, but dude, this is going to change so many things. The internet of value. Big, 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 big.
That's it. Well, love you, everybody. And if you aren't already, if you could follow us at ledgerscale because we host these spaces every day. And turn those notifications on so you know when we're going live. But I am sorry I wasn't on too much today, but I will see everybody tomorrow.
You're all good, Death. Appreciate you joining. And we do appreciate everybody else joining. And like I said earlier, your participation questions would help like make these spaces worthwhile. So please continue that. And if you do want to support us, we have some crypto addresses on the top of the ledgerscale profile. You can donate there for the time being. We're working on the other methods. And we thank you for joining, and we'll be back tomorrow, 3:30 Eastern.
Night, everybody.